Just when you think things might settle down politically, something major crops up.
Yeah.
And right now, in the Philippines, that's the potential impeachment trial of Vice President Sara Duterte. It's a really big development.
It really is. And it's not just one thing. It's a whole collection of serious allegations that have led us here.
So for this deep dive, what have we got?
Well, we've got some solid sources. There's a news report laying out the proposed schedule for a trial, a UN human rights report that gives some important background on the situation there, especially regarding the drug war era.
Okay.
And crucially, we have the verified impeachment complaint itself. That's where the actual charges are detailed.
Right. So the mission today is to unpack all that, understand the charges, the potential process, and, the bigger picture.
Exactly. Let's try and make sense of what's alleged, how this might play out according to the Senate's plan, and why it's such a significant moment.
Okay, let's start with the practical side then, the timeline. Senate President Escudero has actually put forward a schedule.
He has, aiming for a trial start date of July 30th, 2025. But there's quite a lead up to that.
Like what? What are the steps?
Okay, so the plan starts with the session resuming on June 2nd. That's when the articles of impeachment would actually be presented.
Formally to the Senate.
Formally. Then, the very next day, June 3rd, the Senate is supposed to convene as the impeachment court. The senators put on their judge hats, essentially, and take an oath.
The sitting senators, right?
The sitting ones, yes. Then June 4th, the summons goes out, officially notifying the vice president.
Got it. And then there's a bit of legal back and forth, pleadings.
Yeah, that's from June 14th to the 24th. Reception of pleadings. Basically, both sides submit their initial written arguments. Prosecution lays out its case. The defense responds.
Setting the stage.
Then comes the pre-trial phase. That's quite a chunk of time, actually. June 24th to July 25th.
Almost a month. What happens there? Is that like figuring out witnesses and evidence?
Pretty much. Streamlining things, agreeing on procedures, what evidence is admissible, who might testify, trying to make the actual trial run smoother.
Okay, makes sense. Then there's a brief pause.
Right, for the inaugural session of the new Congress, the 20th Congress, on July 28th, because you might have newly elected senators joining.
Ah, so they need to be sworn in too.
Exactly. They take their oath as part of the impeachment court on July 29th. And then, if all goes to plan, the trial itself kicks off on July 30th.
Wow, that's quite detailed. Escudero seems pretty serious about sticking to this.
She does. He explicitly warned against dilatory motions or pleadings, basically saying, let's not drag this out unnecessarily.
He sent a letter to all the senators about this.
Yes, outlining the whole plan. He mentioned the impeachment complaint arrived relatively late, so they needed time to review and possibly tweak the Senate's impeachment rules.
Okay, so rule changes too. What kind of things are they looking at?
Mostly things to grease the wheels, you could say. Giving the Senate president authority to issue the summons himself, preside over the pretrial stuff, manage the submission of written testimony, judicial affidavits.
Standardizing things.
Yeah, and incorporating bits from the regular rules of court on evidence, e-filing, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And also, importantly, what happens if the trial isn't finished before Congress adjourns for a break? Planning ahead.
Right. You don't want it interrupted indefinitely. So these rule changes were supposed to be circulated, reviewed, and hopefully approved in early June.
That was the plan. Circulated by end of March 2025, approved when session resumed June 2nd. And he even issued a special order, 2025-0110, telling staff to get ready, prepare the administrative support needed for the Senate to act as an impeachment court.
Okay, they're taking the logistics seriously.
Definitely underscores the gravity.
Okay.
All right, so let's get into the why, the grounds for this potential impeachment. And the first one, wow. Article 1 alleges betrayal of public trust, culpable violations of the Constitution, and high crimes. Specifically for allegedly contracting an assassin to murder the president, the first lady, and the Speaker of the House.
Wait, contracting an assassin, that's explosive.
Right out of the gate, yes. It centers on a statement she allegedly made in a virtual press conference back in November 2024.
What did she supposedly say?
The complaint quotes her in Filipino, then provides an English translation, essentially saying she told someone, if I get killed, kill BBM, Liza Araneda, and Martin Romualdez. No joke, no joke. Don't stop until you kill them.
She allegedly said that publicly. No joke, no joke.
That's the allegation in the complaint. And the argument is that this isn't just loose talk. It's presented as a direct admission, an instruction, a contract to commit murder against the top leadership.
I mean, the implications are just staggering. A sitting VP ordering hits.
Exactly. The complaint stresses that point, the profound impact. And it wasn't missed internationally. They list outlets like Al Jazeera, CNN, Reuters.
So international news picked it up.
Big time. Creating, as the complaint calls it, international embarrassment and potentially hurting investor confidence. You can action why.
Yeah, no kidding. Did she ever walk it back? Or clarify?
Well, the complaint alleges that in a later interview, she actually confirmed making the statement and even questioned if seeking revenge from the grave was a crime.
Revenge from the grave.
Yeah. So, the legal argument is that these actions are fundamentally destabilizing, they undermine peace and order, and they represent an unconstitutional, violent way to try and remove officials.
And that fits the definition of high crimes and betrayal of public trust.
That's the assertion. High crimes being serious offenses rendering someone unfit, striking at the government's function, betrayal of public trust being conduct against the public interest, abuse of power.
And wasn't her father, the former president, involved somehow? Or supportive?
The complaint alleges that yes, that former President Duterte publicly backed her statements, reportedly called on the military and police to support her, and even allegedly called President Marcos Jr. a drug addict, which the complaint frames as an attempt to incite a coup.
Wow. So it's presented as potentially more than just her words, but part of a larger dynamic.
That's the picture painted in the complaint. Okay, so moving from that incredibly serious allegation to the second major article. This one's about money.
Confidential funds. Right. I remember this being a big issue.
Huge. Article 2 alleges betrayal of public trust and graft and corruption related to the alleged misuse and malversation of confidential funds, both from the Office of the Vice President, OVP, and the Department of Education, DepEd, which she also headed for a time.
Okay, so what's the core allegation regarding the OVP funds?
The headline figure in the complaint is PHP $612.5 million that allegedly just vanished into thin air from the OVP budgets for 2022 and 2023.
Vanished. That's a lot of money.
It is. And they zero in on the 2022 funds. Specifically, PHP $125 million that was supposedly spent and liquidated, accounted for in just 11 days in December 2022.
11 days.
11 days. And get this, that period included 4 non-working holidays.
So effectively like 7 working days to spend 125 million pesos.
Which works out, as the complaint calculates, to over PHP 11 million per day, supposedly for surveillance and monitoring.
11 million a day on surveillance? That seems high.
It definitely raises eyebrows, and the complaint digs into specifics, like safe house rentals. They cite one instance. PHP 1 million allegedly spent on one safe house for just 5 days.
Wait, 1 million for 5 days, that's 200,000 pesos a day for rent.
That's the allegation. And they contrasted with other periods, like similar total amounts were liquidated for safe houses in Q1 and Q2 of 2023, but for much longer durations.
Yeah.
Then in Q3 2023, a lower amount was liquidated for an even longer period. It looks inconsistent.
So the costs seem all over the place, making the 5-day 1 million peso rental look even more suspicious.
That's the implication they're drawing. But it gets worse when you look at the paperwork, or the alleged lack thereof.
The documentation, what was wrong with it?
The complaint describes finding hundreds of questionable or, quote, fraudulent documentary evidence of payment forms, DEPs, submitted to the Commission on Audit, COA.
Fraudulent how?
Things like names of payees being unreadable or incomplete, forms being unsigned. The same handwriting appearing on forms supposedly filled out by different people in places far apart from each other.
Seriously?
Even fictitious names. They mention one example, Mary Grace Piatos. And disbursement dates that were physically impossible, like payments supposedly made in multiple distant provinces on the very same day by the same person.
Mary Grace Piatos. Okay, that sounds less than legitimate. And who signed off on these?
The complaint states Vice President Duterte herself signed the certifications for these expenses under oath, which is a key point and suggests direct oversight or responsibility.
Right. Signing under oath carries weight.
Definitely. And then they did another check. They took the list of people who supposedly received OVP funds, 1,992 names, and checked them against the Philippine Statistics Authority, PSA records.
And?
At least 1,322 of them had no birth records found.
Wow. Over 2/3.
Yeah, and the funds linked to these potentially fictitious payees totaled over PHP 254 million.
$250 million pesos potentially paid to non-existent people.
That's the picture the complaint paints.
Yeah.
And adding to that, the COA itself, the government audit body, officially disallowed over PHP 73 million of those OVP funds from late 2022.
Why did they disallow it?
They determined the money wasn't actually used for its stated purpose, which was supposed to be related to peace and order or national security.
So it was spent on something else or
Yeah.
not spent properly.
Which the complaint argues potentially constitutes malversation. That's a legal term for misappropriating public funds, using them for something they weren't intended for. They also bring up illegal use of public funds and dereliction of duty as part of the betrayal of public trust charge here.
Okay, so a really troubling picture regarding the OVP funds. But you said the Department of Education funds were also mentioned when she was Education Secretary.
Correct. Similar allegations surfaced there regarding the 2023 DepEd confidential funds. First off, they note DepEd spent PHP 112.5 million, 75% of its PHP 150 million confidential fund allocation. And crucially, this was the first time ever DepEd had received confidential funds.
The first time. Okay. And issues with how it was spent.
Well, issues with accountability, certainly. Testimony cited in the complaint suggests the DepEd chief accountant was basically just made to sign the liquidation reports
Without seeing proof.
without being shown the supporting documents, allegedly, which points to a serious lack of transparency. The complaint even suggests the COA was actively deceived about the expenditures.
How so?
They highlight over PHP 15 million supposedly paid out as rewards related to military-hosted youth leadership summits and information campaigns. But the military commanders involved reportedly testified their units never received any DepEd funds for those activities. And anyway, those activities seem to fall under DepEd's regular anti-insurgency programs, not something needing secret confidential funds.
So the money was claimed for one thing, but the people who supposedly ran the program say they never got it.
That's the allegation. And the documentation issues we saw with the OVP, they allegedly pop up again with DepEd.
Same kind of problems.
Similar pattern, according to the complaint. Missing payee names, impossible disbursement dates across distant locations, repeating names, similar handwriting on different forms, the same signature appearing above different typed names.
It sounds almost like a template was being used, if the allegations are true.
And again, they checked the recipient names with the PSA. For DepEd, out of 677 names submitted, 405 apparently had no birth records found. That's over PHP 43 million in disbursements linked to potentially non-existent people.
The pattern does seem disturbingly similar across both offices.
So again, the complaint raises the possibility of malversation, graft, and corruption, maybe even plunder, given the amounts and the alleged lack of proper accounting.
And they tie this back to betrayal of public trust again.
Yes, defining it here as acts that might fall short of a crime, but still show, gross faithlessness, abuse of power, negligence, favoritism, basically conduct unbecoming of a public official entrusted with public funds.
Okay, so we've had the alleged assassination plot, the alleged misuse of hundreds of millions in confidential funds. What's next? There's more.
There is. The third category shifts focus slightly. It's about alleged acts of resisting accountability and suppressing information regarding these very confidential funds.
So not just the spending, but trying to stop people from looking into the spending.
Precisely. The argument is that this resistance violates basic constitutional principles. Public trust, the need for full public disclosure, the people's right to know how their money is handled.
And what specific actions are they alleging?
They claim there was a deliberate attempt through her chief of staff to get the COA, the Audit Commission, to not comply with a congressional subpoena for documents related to the funds.
Trying to block Congress from getting info from the auditors.
That's the allegation. They also mention that Duterte herself and staff from OVP and DepEd repeatedly refused to show up for congressional inquiries until they were legally forced to by subpoenas.
A pattern of avoidance, it sounds like.
The complaint frames it as obstruction. They argue the only reason to resist scrutiny like this is if you're trying to hide something specifically, the alleged malversation of the funds we just talked about.
The logic being, if everything was above board, why not be transparent?
Exactly. So this alleged deliberate failure to account, plus the maneuvers to prevent investigation, are presented as another form of betrayal of public trust.
All right, moving on to the fourth article. This one sounds more direct. Graft and corruption.
Yes. Specifically citing violations of the Anti-Grafts and Corrupt Practices Act, Republic Act 3019.
What does that law cover in this context?
Section 3 of that law is key here. It includes things like persuading or influencing another public official to break rules or commit an offense, or causing undue injury to the government, or giving unwarranted benefits to someone through obvious partiality, bad faith, or gross negligence.
Okay, standard anti-corruption stuff. What examples does the complaint give?
It mentions alleged corrupt acts uncovered during congressional hearings. For instance, the supposed distribution of monetary gifts to DepEd officials involved in procurement
Gifts from who?
by individuals like a former undersecretary and others. And allegedly, these gifts came from funds whose sources were, quote, unknown, even according to a DepEd official who admitted it during a hearing.
Unknown sources giving cash gifts to procurement officials.
Yeah, that's suspect.
Yeah, gee, raises red flags about potential bribery or undue influence, definitely. The complaint also brings up another incident, an alleged attempt by someone described as a close associate of Duterte, Ronald Munciak, to rig the bidding for the DepEd computerization program.
Rig the bidding for school computers. That's the allegation. Trying to manipulate the process to favor certain bidders. The complaint argues these acts are clear breaches of public trust, violations of RA 3019 and also RA 6733, the Code of Conduct for Public Officials.
And the procurement law itself.
Yes, RA 9184, the Government Procurement Reform Act, allegedly violated by the rigged laptop deal attempt. It all points, according to the complaint, to a failure to safeguard government coffers and a betrayal of public confidence.
Okay, so influence peddling, potential bribery, bid rigging. Now, the fifth article goes somewhere else again, her SMI.
Right, the statement of assets, liabilities, and net worth, a required filing for public officials.
And the allegation here is
Culpable violation of the Constitution for failing to file a true and accurate SLN. They point out she's been in public office since 2007.
And looking at her SLNs over the years, they found issues.
Two main alleged issues. First, a huge gap, a gross disproportion, between how much her declared net worth grew and what her legitimate salary as a public official was.
So her wealth grew much faster than her official income could explain.
That's the argument. And second, they allege investigations uncovered vast amounts of hidden or unexplained wealth that weren't disclosed in her SLNs at all.
Hidden wealth. How much are we talking about?
Well, they estimate her official annual income as vice mayor and mayor of Davao was somewhere between, say, 2 and 2.6 million pesos.
Okay, standard for those roles.
But then they cite findings about joint bank accounts she held with her father. Between 2006 and 2015, over PHP 2 billion flowed through these accounts.
2 billion with a B.
That's the figure cited. And during that time, while she was a local official, she personally received over PHP 111 million through these accounts.
111 million compared to an annual salary of maybe 2.5 million max. Yeah, that doesn't add up just from salary.
Exactly. The complaint argues that level of wealth simply can't be explained by her government pay, especially when her declared net worth back in 2007 was only PHP 13.8 million.
So where did the billions or the 111 million she received come from?
That's the unexplained part. And they invoke another law here, RA 1379. It says if an official's assets are manifestly out of proportion to their known lawful income, it's presumed, prima facie, to be unlawfully acquired.
So the burden shifts to her to explain it.
Essentially. They also mention that unexplained wealth is grounds for dismissal under the anti-graft law, RA 3019. And interestingly, they say unexplained wealth cases can sometimes bypass bank secrecy laws, allowing investigation of accounts suspected of holding illicit funds.
Did they show the growth in her declared wealth?
Yes. The complaint includes a table summarizing her salons from 2007 to 2017. It shows her net worth nearly quadrupling in that decade. Again, they argue this growth can't be justified by her income alone.
So the omission of properties, cash, the unexplained accounts, they argue it shows an intent to hide wealth.
Yes, an intent to hide the amassing of significant wealth, which violates the constitutional requirement, Article L, Section 17, to file a true and accurate SALN. And her long time in office doesn't excuse it, they argue. It makes accountability more important.
Okay, this is a lot already. But there's a sixth article, and this one sounds even darker.
It is Article 6, Other High Crimes, including the high crime of murder and conspiracy to commit murder.
Murder again, beyond the alleged assassination plot against the current leaders.
Yes. This goes back further. First, they define high crime conduct, breaching public confidence, hindering law, scandalizing justice, failing ethical standards. They say murder and conspiracy, especially mass killings, clearly fit.
So what specific murder allegations are they referring to here?
This relates directly to her time as mayor of Davao City from roughly 2011 to 2018 and the alleged activities of the Davao Death Squad, the DDS.
Ah, the DDS. That's been rumored and reported for years. What's the link alleged in the complaint?
It relies heavily on testimony given to the International Criminal Court, ICC, by a former DDS leader, a police officer named Arturo Lascanas.
Lascanas, right. He made public confessions. What did he claim about her?
The complaint highlights Toscanos' sworn statements claiming that then-Mayor Sara Duterte personally gave the green light for the DDS killing spree in Davao, their version of Operation Tokan.
She personally approved the killings.
That's Toscanos' allegation, cited in the complaint. He also claimed victims were buried in mass graves, and even more disturbingly, that Duterte herself sometimes participated in shootings.
Participated in shootings? That's a shocking claim from a former insider.
Extremely shocking. And the complaint argues these statements, made under oath to the ICC by a self-confessed DDS assassin, raise fundamental questions about her fitness for any office and implicate her directly in murder or conspiracy by allegedly allowing and sanctioning vigilante justice on a mass scale. And remember, the UN report we mentioned also documents the EJKs and impunity during that wider period, providing context.
Okay, incredibly serious. That brings us to the seventh and final article listed in the sources. What's this one about?
This one covers acts of political destabilization. The argument is that her actions constitute, at minimum, a betrayal of public trust and culpable violations of the Constitution, and possibly even high crimes like sedition or insurrection.
Destabilization? How? By challenging the government she's part of.
Exactly. The complaint alleges she persistently acted to undermine the government, challenge President Marcos Jr.'s authority, encourage disregard for governance, and incite sedition. They point out the obvious conflict. As VP, she's first in line if the president is removed.
So they're saying she had motive and opportunity, and her actions fit a pattern. What specific actions?
They list quite a few examples. Refusing to attend the President's State of the Nation address in July 2024, then calling herself the designated survivor.
Yeah, that raised eyebrows, referencing a scenario where the entire leadership is wiped out.
Participating in that Hakbang Maisug prayer rally in Davao in January 2024, the one aimed at getting the president to resign, where her father allegedly called for military rebellion.
Right, the rally seen as a direct challenge.
Also, another prayer rally in Manila in March 2024 supporting Pastor Kibuloy, where allegedly malicious statements against the president and threats violence were made.
Kibuloy, the controversial pastor who was a fugitive for a time.
Yes. And in August 2024, she publicly attacked Marcos Jr. and defended Kibuloy, criticizing the police operations against him. Then there were public statements in October 2024 about wanting to, quote, decapitate President Marcos Jr. and not recognizing authority above her, followed by alleged profanities and threats.
Decapitate? That's extreme language.
It is. And beyond rhetoric, they list actions allegedly undermining policy or other government branches.
Like what?
Her, quote, conspicuous silence on the West Philippine Sea issue, even calling the administration's efforts a fiasco and saying sovereignty wasn't her job. Publicly criticizing the police ops against Kibuloy again.
Okay.
Allegedly urging the COA to defy that congressional subpoena we mentioned. Allegedly helping subordinates avoid congressional probes. Allegedly physically blocking House security from enforcing an order related to her detained chief of staff.
Physically blocking them.
That's the allegation. Refusing to follow House security protocols by camping in her brother's office. And making public statements alleging bribery in the Supreme Court, which they argue erodes public trust in the judiciary.
So a whole range of actions presented as undermining various parts of the government and its policies.
The complaint concludes these acts disregard the electorate's will, violate the Constitution, betray trust, stir opposition, and provoke disorder, therefore grounds for impeachment.
Which leads to the final wrap-up article in the complaint.
Yes, the seventh one essentially says, look at everything together. The totality of respondents' conduct. Even if you think one specific act isn't enough on its own, her overall conduct shows gross faithlessness, tyrannical abuse of power, unfitness for office, and infidelity to the law and Constitution.
So the cumulative case.
Exactly.
Okay.
It argues the totality constitutes culpable violation of the Constitution, graft and corruption, and betrayal of public trust, making her unfit and warranting removal from office. The complaint, they say, unmasks her true nature.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap this deep dive. We looked at the proposed Senate timeline for a potential impeachment trial, starting maybe late July 2025. And the impeachment complaint itself lays out incredibly serious grounds. The alleged assassination plot against top leaders, the alleged massive misuse of confidential funds in both OVP and DepEd, complete with suspect documents and potentially fictitious recipients.
Right. Plus the alleged efforts to block investigations into those funds.
Then allegations of graft and corruption, like bribery and bid rigging. And the SAN issue unexplained well, far beyond her official salary, allegedly hidden from disclosure.
And arguably the gravest charges, alleged direct involvement in murder and conspiracy via the Davao Death Squad, based on sworn testimony to the ICC. And finally, a pattern of alleged political destabilization against the very government she serves.
It is absolutely crucial for you, the listener, to remember we're relaying the allegations as presented in the impeachment complaint and the news sources we reviewed. These are charges, not proven facts at this stage.
Absolutely. And the UN Human Rights Report provides that wider, sobering context about extrajudicial killings and impunity in the Philippines, which hangs over some of these allegations.
Yeah.
Whatever happens next, this whole situation, the potential trial, the charges themselves, it's going to have huge repercussions for Philippine politics.
No doubt. It really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? What does accountability truly mean for those at the highest levels? And what happens to a nation when its political foundations seem this unstable? Definitely something to watch and reflect on as this develops.